Informative and unpredictable, testing the limits like only we can. From Span Enterprises in Rock Hill, South Carolina, it's the Bandit Room.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Bandit Room. My name is Charles, this is Amber, and our special guest today is here, Mr. Randall Kelly. How are you, Randy?
Fine, how are you?
Thanks for coming. Randy is a CPP, which a lot of people don't know a lot about. A CPP is a Certified Payroll Professional, and that's what we're going to be focusing on today is payroll. The topic of payroll, everything you ever wanted to know and possibly everything you never wanted to know about payroll. So we'll be diving in with that. So Randy, tell us a little bit about what a CPP does. People have probably heard of CPAs, but they might not have heard of CPPs.
Well, that's kind of a good observation. CPPs are to payroll what CPAs are to accounting. It doesn't make anybody an expert. I'll be the first one to say that. But if you give us some time to do the research, we should be able to provide a professional opinion.
All right. And there's a lot fewer CPPs, right, as compared to CPAs?
Yeah, I think we were joking about that the other day. There's probably 9,000 or so in the entire United States. There's probably more CPAs in Charlotte, North Carolina than that.
Than in all of the United States.
That's probably, and most of them work for the very large payroll operations like say ADP and Ultimate Software, and most of those guys take up the vast majority of the CPPs.
You primarily find them in either a payroll company or perhaps a large corporation that just wants to make sure that they have their payroll handled appropriately.
Yeah, and even some smaller to mid-sized organizations, depending upon the complexity of the payrolls.
Gotcha.
But generally, one of the aspects of the CPP is to train people to manage large payroll functions. So that's why you're going to see them generally in a larger environment. You rarely, it's funny you mention that because you rarely see one stand alone, like in more of the payroll administrative type thing. I don't really see that very often.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to perform a payroll, you have to have this certification?
No.
Okay.
No. Actually, there's two payroll certifications. The highest certification you can have in payroll is the Certified Payroll Professional, but there's also a certification called the Fundamental Payroll Certification, which is for generally either HR types or IT types of people that help support the payroll function.
Okay.
So those they're not all that plentiful either, but you do see those sometimes, and again, those are generally going to be in fairly large payroll operations.
Right.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about payroll in general. Now, payroll is a funny field because it's not one that's really taught like in universities. People teach accounting all the time. People come out with accounting degrees, but nobody really gets a degree in payroll. So talk a little bit about how it fits in. It's kind of a blend of multiple departments and how it fits in the scope of different organizations.
Well, I think probably no degree offered, much to the chagrin of a lot of people that are probably involved in payroll. But in terms of payroll, I look at payroll personally as a function in an organization that actually has a bold line reporting responsibility to a high-ranking finance official.
Okay.
Generally, a lot of organizations, that would be your CFO, that would be a controller. They would have a bold line to those people and have to speak that language.
Okay.
Because there's the financial aspects of it and the mathematical aspects of it, obviously. If you remember, too, about 70% of all the monies that corporate America that's in their coffers actually goes to pay for that payroll expense.
I know.
It's a huge amount of money.
I just learned about that, and that was very interesting to hear about that. So that's
for most companies, that is one of their largest expenses is payroll.
The other side of the equation for the payroll folks is, and I think I generally characterize this as that payroll people generally serve two masters. They have that financial side, but then they have a dotted line responsibility to ranking HR folks.
okay.
They have to be able to speak the language that the HR function speaks, and they're also what I would consider the enforcers, if you will, of HR policy. The HR folks write the policy. It's frequently payroll that enforces it.
So it almost sounds like our payroll professionals start out with some kind of HR background degree, and then kind of just work with getting certifications in payroll to be able to perform those services for their employer.
It's funny, but in my experience, that's not where they come from.
Oh, okay.
I'll tell you where they come from. They are hybrid.
Okay.
I would agree with that assessment. They're a hybrid individual. And they have skill sets, they take skill sets from both sides. But most of the ones that I've known, really, I've known a few that had an accounting background, a very few.
Okay.
And I would say, and they would be very quick to tell you that they were accountants, but they have embraced payroll as their specialty.
All right.
And those are CPPs, mind you. And then, but most of the CPPs and most of the payroll people that I know have come from a peripheral financial area, like either accounts payable, accounts receivable, or credit management. That's where the vast majority of the payroll people actually come from.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
All right.
Thank you.
Let's get into the meat and potatoes here and talking about payroll itself. So one of the biggest things to realize when you're thinking about payroll is all the different types of employees that you can have, that an organization can have. Can you talk a little bit about that, about where they all fit in?
I think yeah, the three most commonly known types of employees are going to be your hourly employees. Now, what distinguishes them? When you're setting them up in the system, you assign them an hourly rate.
Right.
Then you would have your salaried non-exempt employees. Those are employees that have a salary, and when you report that salary in the payroll system, you're going to indicate, okay, this is how much they receive either bi-weekly, or this is how much they receive semi-monthly. It even could be weekly.
Okay.
But is what makes them special and different is the fact that they qualify for overtime.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. You know, and I know in my thought process, not knowing anything about payroll, I always thought salary meant you didn't get overtime. So you're saying that you can be a salary employee with overtime?
You can, and frequently a whole lot of people are.
Wow.
But it's what I'm saying also, Amber, is you have what is called a salaried exempt employee, and that's what you're alluding to.
Oh, okay.
Those people are exempt from the overtime regulations under the Fair Labor Standards Act.
Right. There's a lot of different tests to determine that, right?
There's very sophisticated tests to determine. Believe it or not, somebody's not sitting in a back room making determinations about, well, this guy's going to be this kind of employee, or this guy. No, that's not really how it works. There are laws that dictate based upon the job duties and the amount of compensation that you receive. It's going to determine what kind of an employee you're going to be.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of the common pitfalls or misunderstandings that people may have about payroll. And I think one of the biggest things is knowing the difference between an employee and a contractor. And there have been some high-profile cases where people have gotten that wrong, and they've been severely penalized over that.
Indeed, and they shall remain nameless too, because we really don't want to go there.
Yeah.
But and actually just recently there have been some developments. Back in the old days, and I got into payroll in 1988, if that's any indication. But there again, back in the old days, it was a red flag to the Internal Revenue Service if somebody was shown in the same year for the same organization to have been an employee and a contractor. We used to look at that as kind of like a red flag event.
And why would an event like that take place?
Because really it's hard to be one
Okay.
and again the other.
Okay.
It's fairly, but in these days, things have evolved a lot, and there's a whole lot more consultancy, and things have changed enough to where you actually could be. But it's still probably going to be something that's going to draw a lot of focus from the IRS if somebody is showing as a contractor. And of course, one of the major differences with contractors is you do not pay employment taxes on contractors, and contractors do not qualify for benefits from the organization.
Right. So those are the major differences there. Is that an
Yeah.
employee, the company has control over, when they work, where they work, things like that, how they do their job.
Mm-hmm.
But a contractor does not have those obligations, but at the same time, the company does not have the same tax obligations as they do for their employees.
Yeah, one of the biggest things that you look at when you're looking to make a determination whether or not you have a contractor or not is whether or not they are accepting the P&L. They have the ability to make the profit, they have the ability to take the loss. So it's really one of control,
Right.
to your point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So another issue or common topic in the payroll world is the idea of withholdings and then taxes. Because I know you've said this several times. Withholdings are not taxes, or payroll is not taxes.
Payroll people are not engaged in the business of tax at all.
Right.
Payroll people are engaged in the business of withholding.
Right.
Right.
And withholding ideally should be thought of as deposits that an employee is making with Uncle Sam. In the eventuality, they may owe something when Uncle Sam actually turns things into taxes come every April the 15th. Now, that would be how it works. And Payroll has absolutely, don't call me. Payroll has absolutely no control over any of these things. You give me a W-4, we do what you ask us to do.
Right.
And then your employer has no control over it. That money's deducted from your pay and sent directly to those taxing jurisdictions, and it's a trust fund type of situation, and we have absolutely no control over it whatsoever.
Well,
we just make
that's
sure it
good.
happens.
Separates us from Uncle Sam. We don't want to be involved, right?
Now that's definitely a huge misconception though, because when most people, they look at that pay stub or whatever and they see all those withholdings going on and they're thinking, oh, the company took this, you took this from me, you took that, but technically that's still your money. It's been sent to the IRS on your behalf.
Yes, and it's sitting there waiting for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, now let's just kind of quickly go through just a list of dealing with the types of withholdings with specificity. You got your federal income tax withholding, that's paid by it comes out of the employee's proceeds. Next would be your state income tax withholding, and bear in mind, it could be more than one state.
Right.
You could have a situation where somebody lives in one state and actually works in a border state type of circumstance, and there's no reciprocity agreements. I don't want to get into reciprocity agreements really.
But with that
then
being said, Randy, I have to ask, like, if you do, like, we are here in a border state of South Carolina and North Carolina, and a lot of our fellow neighbors and friends commute. Would they pay North Carolina tax if they were working in North Carolina but in South Carolina? Or?
You're more likely to pay a withholding, and not a tax, mind you, a withholding in the state where you work. Whichever state provides the job is generally how payroll people look at that. But it's also important to note, while we're on that topic too, is that in payroll systems, we don't take P.O. boxes. We need physical addresses. We need to know where the person is actually physically working and where they actually physically live. Okay, and then outside of the state income taxes, of course, we have Social Security, and then we have Medicare, and those are withheld from both the employee and the employer. So there's a little bit of blue sky in here somewhere. The employers are paying taxes on behalf of employees as well.
Well, that's good to know.
Okay, and then after that, we're going to have local taxes. Local taxes are, for lack of a better word, just a nightmare for everybody involved in it. And then we have, of course, the federal unemployment tax, and then we're going to have state unemployment taxes. And there again, like I say, that W-4 should be thought of as each employee's covenant with Uncle Sam. That's their deal with Uncle Sam. They decide what their marital status is and how many allowances they want to claim. And you bear in mind, too, that some states have their own individual form that you have to fill out, where you can't fill out a federal W-4.
Oh, okay.
Interesting. Now that W-4, the employee has total control over that whenever you're filling out the W-4. Now there are different schools of thought. Some people want to have the exact right amount taken out, that they don't want to owe anything or be owed anything at the end of the year. There's some people who like getting a check on April 15th from Uncle Sam, and then there's people who they want to withhold, they want to save everything that they have and pay as little throughout the year, and then pay, they pay more at tax time because of that.
If you want to try to break even, I might recommend one of those accounting degrees that you were alluding to earlier, because I think that's going to take a little bit of work to do that.
It takes a lot of work to get it exactly right.
It does, but it's something that people can monitor, like on a quarterly basis, really, and just if they want to break even, there's a lot of people that just go, listen, I'm going to claim single and zero no matter what my marital situation is.
And with that, I've heard, are you able to claim exempt so often throughout the year? Is that something? Is that true or false?
No, certain conditions really need to be met for you to claim exempt. But back to your question, Charles, if as long as somebody turns in a valid, what we call a valid W-4 form, the payroll department is kind of pretty much duty bound to process that form.
Process it as it is.
They won't reject the form unless it's invalid, unless it's missing something that it must have. They didn't indicate what their marital status was. They didn't sign it. They didn't date it. They omitted some pertinent information. That might cause it to be invalidated. But other than that, they're going to process it, even if it's exempt.
Okay.
But you really do need to be very careful claiming exemption from withholding.
Right.
Very few people in my experience are really qualified to claim that exemption.
Right. I just I heard about that and I was unsure of really what that meant, I know to fill out and put some numbers in there and to exempt. I was like,
Well,
wow.
at the end of the year, you get that W-2, and a lot of people that claim that mistakenly were,
I
it
want
was kind of a
Uncle-
rude awakening for those
I definitely
folks.
want Uncle Sam on my side, so we'll
Nightmares.
keep those numbers in there.
Very good. Now, the piece of legislation that heavily mandates how payroll is done is referred to the Fair Labor Standards Act.
That's correct, 1938,
1938,
under the New Deal.
under the New Deal.
Yeah.
Wow, and that's still the go-to piece of legislation.
It is
when
still- it is-
asking any questions about payroll.
It is still kind of like what we predicate most of our payroll operations on. Let me tell you a little bit, Charles, about what's in that piece of legislation. It deals with 5 topics that are paramount to how you're going to perceive payroll. The first is that it establishes the minimum wage.
Mhm.
It gives you what you have to do, I should say, to calculate and pay overtime correctly, which is a whole lot more complicated than people think it is. It's substantially more complicated than people think it is.
I'm sure.
The next thing that's in the Fair Labor Standards Act is child labor. All the regulations relative to child labor are there. There's the equal pay portion of it. And then there's the record keeping requirements as it relates to it. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, isn't there things about lunch break? No coffee breaks, no lunch breaks, no. It doesn't deal with any of those topics. It simply deals with kind of the nuts and bolts of how to process payroll correctly. It's enforced by the U.S. Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division. So if ever there's a complaint or any employee has a complaint to make, that's who it's going to come from.
Okay. Department of Labor for each state.
Mhm. Well, the Wage and Hour Division of the federal.
Oh, the federal.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Interesting. All right. Let's talk about some common payroll issues people may encounter from time to time. So we talked a little bit about, perhaps misclassifying employees or, not having overtime correctly. What are some other payroll issues that people face? Is it just people that don't have a payroll tool and they're just kind of winging it on their own, or what is it? What are some situations that you think are particularly detrimental to companies when?
Well, it may shock people a little bit when I say what I'm going to say, but I'm going to remind people that there's no such thing as underpaying anybody. I mean, underpaying is something, I should say, it's totally the opposite. You cannot overpay anybody.
Okay.
You have to worry about constantly underpaying anybody.
Okay.
Okay. So that's generally when payroll people are in there doing their auditing, and that's generally what they're trying to do is make sure that people are not being underpaid under any circumstances.
From a company standpoint, there are always going to be penalties for underpaying an employee. There's never a penalty for overpaying an employee. Is that fair to say?
There's absolutely no penalty for that at all. And the payroll people, given the choice when we make decisions, if we're looking at a relatively complex calculation or something, we're gonna take the side that is going to have the most benefit to the employee. We're going to take what we call high ground when we're making those decisions. And one of the reasons why we do that is if auditors are following and trying to review and they want to think about the thought process that went into it. We want them thinking that we did take the high ground.
Interesting.
And with that being said, is there a certain thing that you would tell these new business owners, these small business owners that are out there, that to make sure they stay compliant and pay their tax, as far as how they will pay the tax to Uncle Sam and doing what's right on the employee's behalf, to make sure everything's recorded and reported correctly?
Well, I like what you said when you said do what's right. I think that it's pretty important to keep that in the forefront of your mind when you're dealing with payroll issues. And there again, I mean, it's the sacred covenant. Generally the payroll people think in terms of we have to pay people precisely what they're owed, precisely on time. So that's kind of the way that payroll people are going to think generally.
And how are these small businesses and these new companies that are starting out, how do they take action to start a payroll, or what should they look for in a payroll product or software or company to make sure that they're getting what they need to keep their business and their employees compliant?
You should pick your payroll provider very carefully.
Okay.
And it should be based upon a good reputation and the same things that you're saying. If they're the type of business that is obsessed with doing the right thing, that's probably going to be a good choice for you anyway.
Perfect. And because I know that's one thing that I've learned is it's important to have some source of a payroll product, software, person, what may have you, because we can get penalties when it comes to reporting our wages. Is that a big concern in the payroll industry that you found?
Well, another observation is the better qualified they are, the better they can defend you and help defend you if you do find yourself in some sort of unintended predicament.
Right.
It's wise to have people that know the ropes. And can also, I mean, it's like many times a client has asked me, well, this happened, and I said, okay, well then fine, I'll deal with the tax authorities. And I said, the first thing that's going to come out of my mouth is I'm going to ask for abatement.
Right.
And why? Do I think I'm entitled to that? Because we act in a good faith. That's why.
Right.
And that's probably from a payroll perspective going to be one of the better defenses that you can offer.
Interesting. For like Andrew was mentioning, with like very small businesses out there that maybe they don't have a payroll provider per se, they're just kind of running things themselves and maybe running some spreadsheets, figure out what's properly owed, cut the check themselves to the employees. What are the biggest risks for those people out there?
Right.
I mean,
I think probably being in compliance from a tax withholding vantage point is got to be the biggest challenge those people are going to have. Because number one, I mean, all the taxing jurisdictions not only tell you when you have to make these deposits, but how you have to make these deposits. And if you're not doing it through the prescribed method, that can be an issue. I mean, that's one thing that the payroll folks in the room are generally kind of obsessed and concerned with. After we make sure those people are paid precisely what they're owed, precisely on time, that compliance piece comes up strongly in second place, and we look at those things to make sure that we're abiding by the rules, no matter how complicated the rules are.
And would you say there's one thing that stands out the most when you're talking about the employer making sure that they do their due diligence and reporting these taxes and these wages? What is the one standard rule that, regardless of size and money and income, what has to be done on either a monthly basis or a quarterly basis?
One other area where I think that you probably have potential exposure that's very, very important is at W-2 time. The W-2s need to be correct.
Right.
And they need to be provided timely.
Right.
So that's one area I think that small employers probably really need to kind of circle the wagons and make sure that they've got that stuff under control. Of course, that's something that certain payroll providers can.
And those are reported monthly, or how
No,
often?
no, it's annual. It's
annually.
annual.
Okay. Yeah. And as far as like who do we make these tax payments out to? So these employers that are withholding these wages or taxes that you want to call it, when they're withholding these, where do they send them to? Where do they go? How do they get to where they need to be?
Well, they go to the Social Security Administration in many cases. They go to the federal. They go to the state governments. I mean, state unemployment and state income tax withholding to go to the state. Good to have local jurisdictions.
Lots of different places.
That's a lot.
They do go to a lot of different places, and if you want to even add a whole different layer of complexity, you could throw in the garnishment issue and the child support payments and all of those things that are kind of ancillary to any payroll process.
Well, that's a lot of checks cutting and stamps in the mail if you don't have a good compliance.
If they would let
system.
you use stamps, that would be an issue.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So definitely a lot to consider out there. For anyone considering a payroll solution, we definitely recommend paywow.com. It's a great tool for small businesses to use to stay compliant and run their payroll all online through a self-service platform. Any final thoughts, Randy, or final messages to listeners?
No, we would recommend payroll as a perfectly good career to all those people that are searching for one.
Yes.
Please give us a call if you have any payroll questions and you're interested in PayWow, or if you want to just talk with us about knowing if you have the right provider for you. Give us a call. We're more than happy to talk with you. If I can't answer your questions, Randy definitely can, and we'll be more than happy to assist you.
Yeah, all right. Well, very well. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Bandit Room. Stick around next week, see what we talked about.